Hey folks, how's it going? Dr. Spin, eclectic album reviews and general musical meanderings. Welcome to part 7 of my 12-part series, Tier 1 Roundup, where I'm going to go through 48 albums in the first 6 weeks of 2026. And these are going to lay the foundation for all the stuff I'm listening to forward as we try to find the best music of 2026. So first up on this post I got Liquid Mike's Hell is an Airport. Liquid Mike is a small town band in Michigan, and they have a DIY ethos that is, permeates their entire identity. The lead singer and the primary songwriter for the group quit his day job at the post office to finish working this album. They have a rehearsal space down in their basement they've done all their practicing and recording in. And their general philosophy on equipment is that you don't really have to have the newest and best equipment. You just really have to know how to use the equipment you use well. And I think overall, by and large, they do that on this album. Hell is an Airport is probably best described as a power pop album, and in some ways kind of harkens back to the revivalist sound of the 90s and kind of makes a case in some ways for the nostalgia of the 90s. We talk a lot about nostalgia for the 80s, but there's a certain nostalgia for that time as well. And I think that Liquid Mike owes an awful lot to bands like Weezer and their sort of slackery approach to songwriting and power pop. However, the detachment that sort of circumscribes that style of 90s power pop here feels almost like a play for survival. The songs on Hell is an Airport are short, almost aggressively so. A couple of years ago, Tony Molina had an album where all the songs were about a minute and a half, and I really do appreciate brevity and conciseness with songs, but you get to a point where you lack the development that's necessary, I think, to really drive the emotional content of a song home. Fortunately, I think on Hell is an Airport, generally speaking, Liquid Mike dodges this problem by having really compelling melodies and super efficient arrangements of their songs. And yes, some of the songs get to that 1 minute and 90 second mark. Some of them go past to 2:30, almost 3 minutes, which is standard kind of power pop length. But in any case, the songs are kind of self-realized enough that they don't really generally leave you wanting. There's a couple songs that feel like they're cut off a little bit early, but generally speaking, they feel like a song in and of itself, self-compartmentalized. And again, I think repurposing that detachment from 90s power pop is really kind of compelling here because the album sort of rotates around this idea of just stuckness, a band that's big enough to tour but not big enough to make a living off that, loving music but being trapped by the monotony of everyday life around it. For example, the song Sword Shop is a song about a guy who hangs out in a dead mall. There's nobody else is working there except for him, and he's just selling swords that nobody wants. That song sort of describes the worldview that you'll find throughout the album. And listening to this album kind of feels like watching old grainy VHS tapes that have been upgraded for current life, for the upload generation. And I think the song's lengths cater to the attention span of meme culture. I think the point that's really worth driving home about the way that this album repurposes the ennui of the 90s is that it understands the difference between slacking off and being worn down. Next up I got Moron Police, Pachinko. Moron Police had kind of become the big buzz in the progressive rock community over the last couple of years. And there's a lot of anticipation building up into the release of this album. But it was complicated in 2022 by the death of their drummer, Thor Peterson, and the future of the band, and specifically this album, were definitely in question for a while. But the rest of the band rallied and fortunately, out of a labor of love, completed the album with the addition of Billy Reimer of the Dillinger Escape Plan filling in on drums. Now, knowing that sort of dark setting for this album, the actual expression on the album might be a little bit surprising because it's actually a very uplifting recording, and its concept is very surreal and almost bizarre because it's a concept album about a person who is reincarnated as a pachinko machine in a Tokyo arcade. And in many ways, its lyrics are surreal and almost to the point of sometimes being silly. But, if you look at like the work of surrealist artists and like Salvador Dali, he would have these symbols in his paintings that obviously meant something else, sometimes even something subconscious. And I think the use of surrealism on this album is sort of a way to lighten up the tone of the album, kind of gives them an opportunity to fuel the album with an emotional undertone that might not be available otherwise. Musically speaking, the album is a great example of contemporary progressive rock. It's technically proficient, it's stylistically adventurous, and it's bursting with celebratory energy. There's a lot of stylistic sharp turns that could in some ways kind of evoke Mr. Bungle, but there's a real clarity to the album that really fits it in this contemporary prog, progressive rock, and prog metal genre. But aside from a 15-20 minute two-part epic that's in the middle of the album, generally speaking, the songs are brief, but they're packed to the gills with musical content. Now, there are moments when the standards of contemporary progressive rock do kind of obscure the voices of the individual players. This is something I felt about contemporary progressive rock for a while is, in the original sort of formative stages of progressive rock, individual members had very distinctive voices. You could always tell the difference between, Steve Howe, Steve Hackett, and Robert Fripp. You blindfold yourself, you hear those three guys, it would not be a question as to who was playing what. And the bands were made up of people all with distinctive voices, and their chemistry together was the thing that made a lot of that music interesting. Contemporary progressive rock kind of buffs out the individual voices of the players to an extent. And that happens a little bit here, but there's so much character to the album and there's so much technical precision that it kind of makes up for it. And certainly the sentimental undertone of the album is there if you can find it, and really drives home a uniquely uplifting record that processes grief not by attacking it head on, but by transforming it into motion, color, and sound. You found me dancing in the moonlight on the far side. I'm anywhere you want me to go. I'll be laughing beside you when you grow old. I'll always be swirling around. Here I am and here I go. And I know that you know just like me. I think I cannot be the Pachinko. Okay, next I got Nourished by Time, The Passionate Ones. This album came up on a lot of 2025 best of year-end lists, and I think rightfully so. One of the big observations that people made about it is about how it really is an album that plays with genre in a very carefree way. And when you first listen to this album, it kind of presents itself as an R&B album because the vocals definitely borrow a lot, I think, from, again, early 90s R&B. But the closer you look at it, the more you start to look at the elements that go into it. It's got elements of synth pop, it's got elements of alternative rock, and it succeeds not because it tries to reinvent these styles, but because it shows how porous the distinctions between these styles have become. The first frame that came up for me on this album was Channel Orange by Frank Ocean, which I thought was an album, again, that looked backward and forward at the same time. And its follow-up, Blonde, didn't really give me the same feeling. But this album, if it would have come after, I think, Channel Orange or around the same time, it might have helped to develop a whole different kind of genre of pop R&B. But as it is now, it really shows how genre is becoming increasingly unstable. But that instability is the album's strength because it calls on lots of different genres from the past and kind of effortlessly sieves through them all to create this album that lies a little bit beyond a very easily classifiable genre. Comparisons to Sloss and Malone might not be too far off in the way that it uses different genres to create emotional clarity. And Marcus Brown, the guy who is behind Nourished by Time, really suffuses these songs with a sense of wonder and absolute nowness as his music addresses contemporary anxiety while carrying echoes of the past. Most importantly, though, The Passionate Ones is not a difficult listen. It's very inviting, even as it dissolves the boundaries that once separated genre. Replication is not really the goal here, transformation is. And that allows Nourished by Time to create music that's both familiar and unresolved. And finally, I got Daniel Romano's outfit, Too Hot to Sleep. Too Hot to Sleep is a deliberate act of narrowing. When a lot of other artists are trying to pull genres together and dissolve the boundaries between them, Daniel Romano tries to pull things to a very clear center. This album is a textbook example of power pop, but not the 90s revivalist version. Looking back more towards the 70s in this one, it has the harmonic depth of like Cheap Trick and Big Star. It's got the energy and the confrontational attitude of punk and the swagger of 60s rock. Daniel Romano himself is famously pretty prolific. He has his hands on lots of different styles. He's been very successful at creating folk music, country music, a little bit of progressive rock, a lot of different styles, but all centered on songwriting type styles. And his success in all these different styles is such that they seem to be mutually exclusive. It seems like one is so successful that the other one couldn't possibly be made by the same guy. But that's the kind of focus that Daniel Romano has. He values the idea of having an idea and seeing it through. He views music creation as actively summoned magic, and even though he's the centerpiece of the outfit, this particular group is a more of a collaborative effort than some of his other works. His brother Ian Romano has some show-stopping drum performances on this album that really help to propel things forward in a really vital way. But this creative focus isn't just myopic on the music, it's also about the whole concept of the outfit. Then Romano's original inspiration for the outfit was this idea of like leather jackets with patches on the back of them. This aesthetic sort of permeated the identity surrounding the outfit. That concept, that environment is part of what makes the focus of this album, I think, so noticeable. Lyrically and emotionally, Too Hot to Sleep asks a very blunt question. If these are end times, how are we to behave? But in my opinion, the album answers this question not with fear, but with defiance. It's a shout down of politicians and techno-fascists delivered through harmony-laden melodies and aggressive forward motion. The music is urgent without being chaotic, melodic without being soft. And that's all I got for you guys this time around. So if you like this video, like and subscribe, share it with your friends. Also follow me over on Spotify. There's a big playlist that's going to be growing throughout the entire year. I'm going to be adding representative songs from all of these albums. And if you want to be part of the panel that helps to decide which of these albums would be the best by the time we get to the end of 2026, please sound off my Patreon below. Until you see you next time, I'll catch you guys on the flip side.